Good evening from the Bronx, New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We are here at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, which is part of the Montefiore Health System. I was actually born in this very hospital here in the Bronx. And the year I was born, 1979, 40 years, if you're doing the math in your head, there were 338 parts per million of atmospheric carbon dioxide in the world. In 1989, that's 10 years later, it's also the birth year of the congresswoman who represents this very district. It was up to 355 parts per million. And as of 2017, it was 405 parts per million. What do those numbers mean? We'll put it this way. That 405 parts per million is the highest in recorded history in ice core records dating all the way back 800,000 years. Okay? And here's the other thing. Half of all the carbon emissions that we have put in the air as a society have happened in the last 30 years, when we basically knew what we were doing. So, in 2018, the UN scientists issued a report, and they basically said, we have to get on this problem. If we'd gotten on it earlier, it would have been easy. If we started in 1979, we could have cut a little bit every year, or if we started in 1989 or 1999, but we didn't, and now we're here, and what we have to do to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change is to cut emissions in half in 12 years. 12 years. That's the project we've been tasked with by the Earth that we inhabit. There is an urgency felt like never before in a rising generation of Americans and across the world who realize that the clock is ticking and getting close to running out. And into the vacuum has come a bold new policy proposal that might be the most controversial thing in American politics at the moment. You've probably heard about it. It's called the Green New Deal. It envisions a carbon zero economy by the middle of the century and a transformation of the American economy and indeed society. Some people call it a socialist monster. Some people call it our only hope for survival here in the way of life that we hold dear. The congresswoman, the one who was born in 1989, the woman who represents this district, the youngest woman to ever represent a district in the United States Congress, who is the co-sponsor of that resolution, has become kind of the mascot for it as well. And tonight, we're going to talk to her about what her vision means. Please welcome Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you.
It's a real hostile crowd. This is going to be tough. We're really, how are you doing?
I'm well. I'm excited now that we're back in the BX.
Yes. You come out of the gate, you represent this district here in the Bronx and Queens. People got all sorts of issues. All sorts of issues. And the first big issue you're doing is a Green New Deal.
That's right.
So why this issue, front and center, first thing? What connects you to this?
So this issue is not just about our climate. First and foremost, we need to save ourselves, period. There will be no future for the Bronx. There will be no livable future for generations coming for any part of this country in a way that is better than the lot that we have today if we don't address this issue urgently and on the scale of the problem. First of all, we've been here before. We've been here before with the Great Depression. We've been here before with World War II, even the Cold War. And the answer has been an ambitious and directed mobilization of the American economy to direct and solve our problem, our biggest problem. And historically speaking, we have mobilized our entire economy around war. But I thought to myself, it doesn't have to be that way, especially when our greatest existential threat is climate change. And so to get us out of this situation, to revamp our economy, to create dignified jobs for working Americans, to guarantee health care and elevate our educational opportunities and attainment, we will have to mobilize our entire economy around saving ourselves and taking care of this planet.
Green New New Deal idea is obviously a reference to the New Deal, which was one of the largest mobilizations that happened in American history. And I think it's easy to lose sight of the scope of the thing, right? I mean, agriculture, financial policy, industrial policy, the Works Progress Administration going out and doing everything from taking slave narratives to building bridges to dynamiting tunnels through the Alleghenies to put in roads. It was a kind of comprehensive reshaping of American economy and society. And join me to talk about how that metaphor works and the urgency of the crisis. I want to bring in Rachel Cletus, who's an economist at the Union of Concerned Scientists and the policy director there. Good to meet you.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
And Damon Drummer, who is at, it's called the New Consensus. You're the co-founder and executive director. And if folks don't know what that is, it's kind of a think tank that has been, it's the birthplace of the Green New Deal in many respects. You've been working on climate policy for a while, Rachel. So when you think about the Depression, right, think about a crisis that's like at the door. People are literally eating dirt, right, in Oklahoma. People are starving to death in the streets of America. That's not what we have really right now. We have something different. But why should people think that the scale is the same, crisis-wise?
Yeah, the reality is our human-caused emissions, the heat-trapping emissions that are due to human activities like burning fossil fuels and cutting down forests have already led to a temperature increase of about 1 degree Celsius. That's nearly 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're already seeing the impacts of climate change around us in more extreme weather events. So the impacts of climate change are very real, they're here and now. And the kind of temperature increase we've seen, frankly, I see a lot of young people here in the audience. Most kids who are graduating high school have not seen a year without a record-breaking temperature. We've had 18 of the 19 hottest years since 2001. So this is the future into which our young people are growing up.
And I think it's important to note that this is here. This is not something that's coming. We had, on the events of September 11th, 2001, thousands of Americans died in the largest terrorist attack on U.S. soil. And our national response, whether we agree with it or not, our national response was to go to war in one, then eventually 2 countries. 3,000 Americans died in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. Where is our response?
So the Green New Deal, just to give people a thought, right, the Green New Deal is a resolution. Resolutions aren't legislation, they're not policies, it's sort of a set of goals. There's 5 goals. One of them is net zero emissions, good high-wage jobs, infrastructure and industry, a clean and sustainable environment, justice and equity. Damon, as someone who's sort of worked on this, like, what's the theory of the case of why the things have to go together?
So the Green New Deal is a massive investment in our industrial capacity, in American manufacturing, to deploy all the resources of our entire society, not just our money, but our ingenuity to tackle this crisis, and to do so in a way that grows our economy and that gives people a share in that new wealth and that new growth.
I think people see there's a little bit of like the combination Taco Bell Pizza Hut situation here. It's like, it's cool they're together, but do they need to be together?
They do.
Like,
they do. Absolutely. And it's not like that situation at all, because here's the deal. Here's the deal, is that we could solve all of the environmental issues in the world if those climate policies and solutions are drafted onto the existing framework of economic injustice, then we will perpetuate our social problems. And so even if you do pass, and the yellow vests in France are a perfect example of what happens when you do not address economic and social justice in the same sweep as climate policy, because what happens is that A, the policy becomes unsustainable, B, society starts to fall apart, which is what happens in income inequality. Yeah. And then C, we don't actually solve the environmental issue.
And they are connected because because of the higher asthma rates that people of color in this country suffer from, particularly children of color. We know the exposure to toxics is much higher for communities of color and low-income communities. These are all connected, and we can solve these problems together.
Okay, but here's my, just to push back on that, right? Because for so long that I've covered climate policy, it's like price on carbon, put a price on carbon. Mm-hmm. And congratulations, it now costs more for electricity and fuel. How long is that going to last, right?
That's right.
But the flip side is, and I want you to respond to this, Damon, does it make more sense? We have the urgency of this crisis we got to solve, right? To also tack on, say, universal health care, which is a big difficult fight in and of itself. Like, doesn't that make it harder to actually attack the crisis that we're talking about?
It actually makes it easier to attack the crisis.
Why?
Right?
Why?
Because if we're talking about making investments to create millions of high-paying jobs, policies like universal health care, policies like universal family care make it easier for people to join in on that mobilization. And so this isn't a nice to have, it's absolutely necessary because it's about reshaping the entire economy. A fossil fuel economy that is designed to exploit and extract, right, requires disposable people and disposable places. What the Green New Deal says, no more disposable people, no more disposable places.
So, but then, I mean, but then the people that are listening to this, right, and are saying, I feel you on the climate. Agreed, it's getting hot. But, like, that sounds like socialism. That sounds big. No, I'm serious. Like, that's a big, you're talking like, okay, all right. Yes. But I'm saying not everyone applauds when they hear that, right? They're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You're talking about this huge mobilization, and I'm like, I don't trust the government can pull this off.
Well, you know, here's a couple of issues here. One is that, you know, if you want to bring up these labels and this, that, and the other and have that whole conversation, that's a whole other thing. But the one thing that we cannot rebuke and the one thing that we cannot deny is that climate change is a problem of market failure and externalities in our economics. And moreover, ExxonMobil knew that climate change was real and man-made starting as far back as 1970. The entire United States government knew that climate change was real and human-caused in 1989, the year I was born. So the initial response was, let the market handle it, they will do it. 40 years and free market solutions have not changed our position. Yeah. So this does not mean that we change our entire structure of government. But what it means is that we need to do something. Right. Something. Yeah. And that is what this solution is about.